Lone assassin or conspiracy? On a day few who were alive at the time will ever forget, President John F. Kennedy was shot in Dallas, Texas. His alleged assassin was quickly arrested only to be killed in full view of television audiences 2 days later. Decades on, the questions still refuse to go quiet. Kennedy had been warned about going to Dallas. The city's ultra-conservative power base included influential adversaries, and the political climate was openly hostile. But he brushed aside the objections. He needed to mend fences in Texas and strengthen support from powerful figures such as Governor John Connally, especially with an unannounced re-election bid looming the next year. Upon arriving at Dallas's Love Field, the President and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy joined Governor and Mrs. Connally in the rear of an open car, the second vehicle in a motorcade headed into the city. Kennedy was scheduled to deliver a luncheon address. Along the route, crowds cheered. Nellie Connally turned to the president and said, "You sure can't say Dallas doesn't love you." At 12:30 p.m., the motorcade slowed to make a right turn and then a left, approaching a triple underpass that led to the freeway. An agent in the lead car said to the driver, "5 more minutes and we'll have him there." In a rear car, the president's secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, remarked, "Just think we've come through all of Dallas and there hasn't been a single demonstration." A nearby woman laughed. "We're not so bad," she said. A reporter in the press car, misreading the sign on the rust-colored brick building ahead, asked, "What the hell is a book repository?" Standing between the Texas School Book Depository and the underpass along the motorcade route, Abraham Zapruder raised his movie camera and aimed it at the presidential car. Nearby, a bystander named Charles Brem held his 5-year-old son aloft so the child could wave. Seeing them, Kennedy smiled and waved back. Then shots rang out. One bullet passed through the president's neck and then through Governor Connally's back, chest, right wrist, and left thigh. Kennedy clutched his throat. Connally, bleeding heavily, slumped toward his wife. Hearing the governor scream, Jacqueline Kennedy turned anxiously toward the president just as a second bullet tore away the top of Kennedy's head. A nation watches the unthinkable. The assassination of the 35th President of the United States on November 22, 1963, stunned the nation and the world. For that Friday and the next 3 days, millions across the globe sat transfixed before their television sets as the remaining scenes of the tragedy unfolded. Within minutes, Lee Harvey Oswald left the Texas School Book Depository, where he was accused of firing shots from a corner window on the 6th floor. At 1:15 p.m., Oswald shot Dallas policeman J.D. Tippit, who had stopped him for questioning. Eyewitnesses alerted police and directed them to a movie theater where Oswald had tried to hide. He was arrested for Tippit's murder and later accused of assassinating Kennedy. Oswald proclaimed his innocence of the second charge, insisting he was being made to take the blame while the real culprits went free. At 12:38 p.m., a case identified as number 24740, a white male suffering from a gunshot wound, was admitted to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where the presidential car had sped. A priest was called, but at 2:00 p.m., doctors pronounced John F. Kennedy dead. Over the objections of local authorities, Secret Service agents placed the body in a coffin and transported it to Love Field. Within an hour, Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president by Judge Sarah T. Hughes aboard Air Force One, with Jacqueline Kennedy standing beside him in her blood-spattered pink suit. That evening, the party returned to Washington, D.C., where an autopsy was performed at Bethesda Naval Hospital. On Saturday, November 23, Jacqueline Kennedy chose a grave site at Arlington National Cemetery. The state funeral was scheduled for Monday. In Dallas, Oswald was questioned for hours. Ruby's shot and a second death on live TV. At the request of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, Oswald was to be transferred from Dallas Police Headquarters to the sheriff's office on Sunday. Shortly before noon, as the transfer took place, a Dallas nightclub operator named Jack Ruby stepped from a crowd of reporters and shot Oswald again, in full view of the national television audience. Ruby claimed he acted spontaneously, out of rage over the president's death and a desire to spare Jacqueline Kennedy the agony of an Oswald trial in Dallas. By 9:00 a.m. Monday morning, November 25th, 250,000 mourners had passed the catafalque holding Kennedy's body in the U.S. Capitol. At Mrs. Kennedy's request, The building was kept open all night to accommodate the crowds. After a funeral service at St. Matthew's Cathedral presided over by Cardinal Cushing of Boston and attended by many world leaders, Kennedy was buried at Arlington. Jacqueline Kennedy lit an eternal flame at his grave. Doubt about the official explanation. On the very morning of his death, Kennedy made an eerie prediction to his advisor Kenneth O'Donnell. If anyone wants to shoot a president, it's not a very difficult job. All one has to do is get on a high building with a telescopic rifle, and there is nothing anybody can do. That scenario closely resembles the conclusion of the Warren Commission, named for its chairman, Chief Justice Earl Warren. Delivered to President Johnson on September 24, 1964, the report, supported by 26 volumes of documentation, concluded that Kennedy was killed by a lone fanatic, Lee Harvey Oswald. But doubts rose even as the commission worked. Some argued Oswald did not act alone and was merely a hitman for a larger team. Theories pointed in every direction: Cuban leader Fidel Castro, the Soviet Union's secret police, domestic power plays involving the FBI or CIA, and most persistently the mafia, missing evidence. When a House of Representatives committee re-examined the case between 1976 and 1978, it criticized the autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital, claiming it had not been conducted in accordance with professional standards. One participating doctor complained that they were not allowed to open and follow the track of the bullets through the president's body because of objections from a high-ranking personality, presumably a military figure, without establishing the bullet trajectories. The autopsy could not definitively determine the angles of the shots, whether both came from the Texas School Book Depository window or whether one might have come from another direction. The preserved brain and other autopsy materials were given to Kennedy's secretary. When these were deposited with the National Archives in 1966, the brain was found to be missing. The question that followed was as chilling as it was simple. Had evidence been suppressed? How many shots? The Warren Commission concluded Kennedy was struck by 2 bullets, both from above and behind, consistent with the lone assassin theory. In the late 1970s, another piece of evidence was re-examined, a tape recording from a Dallas policeman's motorcycle escort. Because of a technical defect, the recorder had been left running from Love Field. For years it was dismissed as useless faint rustling, nothing more. The House committee asked acoustic experts to analyze the tape using modern computer methods. Believing they detected sounds consistent with gunfire, the experts went to Dallas in 1978 and conducted test shots at the assassination site. Comparing the new recordings with the old tape, they claimed with a probability bordering on certainty that 4 distinct shots could be isolated. According to that analysis, 3 shots came from the Texas School Book Depository window where Oswald was said to have stood. 3 spent cartridges were found there, suggesting 1 shot may have missed. The 4th, however, was said to have come from in front of and to the right of the presidential car near the Grassy Knoll. The Warren Commission had ignored or discounted witnesses who reported hearing a 4th shot. Others claimed they saw a puff of smoke from the knoll and men with FBI identification leaving a nearby parking lot, though the FBI denied any agents were stationed there. 3 people reportedly tried to catch a man running from the parking lot, but he escaped. Some viewers of the Zapruder film point to a detail that still fuels debate. After the first shot, Kennedy's head appears to move forward, then snaps back violently, a motion some argue is consistent with a fatal impact from the front. Weighing all evidence, the House committee concluded in 1979 that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. Who the conspirators were, the report did not say. Man between 2 worlds. Despite the mountain of writing since the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald remains an enigma. As one scholar put it, it can feel possible to believe almost anything about him and damn near impossible to know what's true. A school dropout at 16, Oswald joined the U.S. Marine Corps on October 24, 1956, 6 days after his 17th birthday. Trained as a radar technician, he was assigned to Atsugi Air Base outside Tokyo, associated with U-2 photoreconnaissance flights over the user. Oswald had few friends and spent much of his free time reading, particularly Marxist material, and studying Russian. He was court-martialed twice, once for possessing an unauthorized private weapon and later for addressing provoking words to a sergeant. An officer described him as a little bit nuts on foreign affairs. Oswald became an enthusiastic supporter of Fidel Castro after Castro seized power in Cuba in January 1959. On September 11, 1959, Oswald received an early release from the Marines, ostensibly to support his dependent mother. After giving her $100, he sailed from New Orleans to Le Havre, crossed Europe, and reached Moscow. On October 31st, he appeared at the U.S. Embassy to renounce his American citizenship, declaring himself a Marxist, applying for Soviet citizenship, and offering information he claimed to possess as a radar technician. Oswald lived in the Soviet Union for 2.5 years. He married a Russian woman, Marina, but grew disillusioned. On June 1, 1962, Oswald, Marina, and their infant daughter were allowed to leave. He said he never received Soviet citizenship and denied giving secret information. The U.S. Department of State overruled immigration authorities to readmit him, stating it was in the best interests of the United States to have him depart the Soviet Union as soon as possible. These details opened another set of questions. Was his defection what it looked like or something planned? Were opportunities missed to ask harder questions in the official investigation? Fair play for Cuba. After working odd jobs in Fort Worth and Dallas, Oswald moved his family to New Orleans in spring 1963. Before leaving Texas, he purchased a rifle by mail with a telescopic sight. According to the Warren Commission, he used it to attempt to assassinate retired Major General Edwin A. Walker, an ultra-conservative figure who urged Kennedy to send troops to oust Castro. In New Orleans, Oswald styled himself as the imaginary president of a non-existent local chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, a pro-Castro organization. The address he listed was linked to a building that housed offices associated with a retired FBI agent, Guy Bannister, said to coordinate militant anti-Castro groups. Oswald was arrested twice in August 1963 after conflicts with anti-Castro Cuban exiles, yet Bannister and Oswald were reportedly on friendly terms. In September, Oswald traveled to Mexico City and unsuccessfully sought a visa to Cuba en route to the user. Back in Dallas, he began working at the Texas School Book Depository. In mid-October, on Tuesday, November 19th, he could have read a newspaper account of a speech in Miami where Kennedy all but invited the Cuban people to overthrow Castro and promised prompt U.S. aid if they did. The Dallas motorcade route was also published and would pass directly in front of Oswald's workplace, Kennedy versus the Mafia. If Oswald acted for Cuba or the Soviet secret police, why was he denied an escape route? Some conspiracy advocates suggest a look-alike visited Mexico City to falsely link Oswald to Cuba and the user. Others argue the real conspirators were the Mafia. Both John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy were visible opponents of organized crime. In 1957, Senator Kennedy sat on the Senate Rackets Committee. Robert Kennedy, as chief counsel, led interrogations. When appointed Attorney General in 1961, Robert launched a major Justice Department campaign against crime, including action against Carlos Marcello, the New Orleans Mafia boss, who was deported to Guatemala but secretly returned. Marcello was said to have plotted revenge. The logic was cold: eliminate the president to immobilize the attorney general. Informants reported ominous predictions that Kennedy would be hit, and associates suggested there was a price on the president's head. Another motive cited by some theorists was Cuba. Castro had expelled the Mafia, which had profited enormously from gambling and vice in Havana. The mob wanted those profits back and resented Kennedy's perceived lack of resolve, especially after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in April 1961 and the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Advocates of a mafia conspiracy have tried to connect the mob to Oswald and Ruby, though critics argue it makes little sense that professional criminals would rely on such unlikely figures. In 1988, writer Steve Rivel claimed 3 Corsicans were hired for the assassination, but all 3 reportedly had strong alibis for November 22, 1963. Was Kennedy the target? Another theory emerged around the 25th anniversary. Oswald may have aimed at Governor Connally. After Oswald's defection to Russia, his honorable discharge was downgraded to undesirable. Believing this would hinder employment on his return, Oswald wrote to Connally, then Secretary of the Navy, seeking reversal and was refused. In her final appearance before the Warren Commission, Marina Oswald suggested her husband might have been shooting at Connally because of the discharge decision. By the time she offered this, the commission had apparently already formed its conclusions and did not include her testimony in its report. A New York Times or CBS poll taken shortly before the 25th anniversary found most respondents believed in a conspiracy and suspected an official cover-up. Yet many also felt it was too late to establish the truth, and a majority opposed further investigations. As Representative Louis Stokes, who headed the House committee years later, observed, "It does not seem likely that these mysteries will ever be solved. It's more likely than not that we'll never know." Did you know? 4 American presidents have been assassinated. Abraham Lincoln 1865, James A. Garfield 1881, William McKinley 1901, and John F. Kennedy 1963. Before Kennedy's death, Lincoln's assassination was considered the most notorious and most deeply mourned. Lincoln took office as the nation's 16th president amid a crisis over slavery that erupted into civil war. Between his election in November 1860 and his inauguration in March 1861, 7 Southern states seceded and formed the Confederate States of America. The war began with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861, and ended with Lee's surrender to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865, leaving more than 600,000 dead. 5 days later, Lincoln sought relief from years of tension with an evening at the theater. Waiting at Ford's Theater in Washington was actor John Wilkes Booth, a Southern sympathizer. Booth entered the unguarded presidential box and fired a single fatal shot into the back of Lincoln's head. Although Booth broke a leg jumping to the stage, he escaped on a waiting horse. 2 weeks later, he was found in a Virginia barn and died during its capture. 9 others were implicated. 4 were hanged, 4 imprisoned, and 1 later exonerated. Death of a movie goddess. Like John F. Kennedy, Marilyn Monroe became a symbol of her era. Critics scorned her acting, but few denied the magnetic screen presence that made her a global box office star. Her death during the night of August 4, 1962, from an overdose of sedatives, was officially listed as a probable suicide. Monroe's life was relentlessly mined by gossip, and after her death, rumors multiplied, especially stories linking her romantically to both John and Robert Kennedy. According to these accounts, an alleged affair with John began in the early 1950s and continued into his presidency. When the relationship became too dangerous, rumors claim Robert was asked to console her. At a Madison Square Garden birthday celebration for the president on May 19, 1962, Robert was said to hover around her closely. Monroe reportedly told friends the younger Kennedy wanted to marry her. That summer, she repeatedly called him at the Justice Department, and he allegedly refused her calls. On August 4th, Robert Kennedy arrived in Los Angeles. According to Monroe's maid, he visited her that afternoon. Sometime after p.m. that night, Monroe was found unconscious in her home and rushed to a hospital, where she was pronounced dead.